Hello friend, welcome to Stories by Tocci. We bring you interesting folk tales. Please don't forget to hit the like button, please share, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thank you for doing so. Now let's get into the story. If there was ever a man who wore charm like a second skin, it was Jordan Madu. Even his shadow seemed to strut when he walked. In Rivershade, his name lingered on lips like the aftertaste of sweet palm wine, smooth, tantalizing, and slightly dangerous. He lived in a one-bedroom flat that always smelled of cologne, cheap wine, and overconfidence. The mirror by his bedside wasn't just furniture, it was a shrine. He would pause in front of it, adjusting his shirt, cocking his head, and smirking like he was God's own gift to women, wrapped in swagger and tied with pride. Women called him different names: fine boy no pimple, breeze of the town, even national cake. But to Jordan, they were all players in a game where he alone dealt the cards. Relationships? He treated the idea like a worn-out shoe, useful once, but now beneath him. He told his friends that marriage was a scam for men who had run out of options, and commitment was the leash that choked adventure. They would laugh over drinks as he bragged about the women who threw themselves at him like pebbles into a stream, many, small, and easily skipped over. Yet beneath all that bravado was a hollowness he didn't know how to name, one that echoed louder each time he woke up next to a different body, but the same silence. But Jordan never stopped to listen to that emptiness. He was too busy being the leading man in a play only he could direct, with romance scenes cut short and hearts left behind like sandals at a beach party. Then Clara Wills entered the town like a whisper that grew into a windstorm. She wasn't like the others. She wasn't loud, didn't swing her hips like a siren, or bat her lashes like a trap. She simply existed, quiet, observant, a bit of sunlight stitched into brown skin. She had just started working at Madamello's fabric store, folding ankara patterns with the kind of care that suggested she folded more than cloth, perhaps pieces of her own broken past. When Jordan first saw her, she was laughing with a customer, eyes crinkling in a way that made his heartbeat skip and stumble like a drunk man on wet tiles. He swaggered in the next day, pretending to be interested in buying lace, asking unnecessary questions, tossing compliments like confetti. Clara just smiled faintly and returned to arranging the shelf. That moment pricked Jordan's ego like a loose nail in a fine shoe. He tried again, and again. She didn't play hard to get, she simply didn't play. And that was what made her unforgettable. One Friday evening, he invited her for suya and a drink, and to his shock, she agreed. She came in a plain blouse and sandals, hair tucked neatly behind her ears, and sat across him like a woman who wasn't trying to impress anyone. Jordan talked, Clara listened. She didn't laugh at his tales of wild nights or his jokes about women. She simply sipped her malt and looked at him with eyes that saw past the show, and somehow that evening stretched into more. She began coming over, sometimes with food, other times just with silence. It was the silence that unnerved him. It felt like she was planting herself in his life without asking permission, softly but surely, like a seed cracking concrete. Jordan called it vibing, but Clara, in her quiet heart, called it something else. To her, it wasn't casual. It was a hope rising from the ashes of past rejections. She never said she loved him, and he never said he loved her. But when the test strip in her hand turned two angry lines, she didn't panic. She simply showed it to him, lips pressed together like she was keeping 1,000 words from spilling. Jordan stared at it like a ghost had walked into his room. "You know what to do," he muttered, avoiding her eyes. She didn't flinch. "I'm not removing it," she said, each word dropping like a stone in water. Silence danced between them, thick enough to choke. The next day she arrived with a small bag and folded wrapper, moved into the spare room without fanfare, and began living like the place was hers. Jordan laughed bitterly, thinking it was just a phase, but Clara wasn't playing games. She cooked, cleaned, bought prenatal vitamins, and began preparing for motherhood with the kind of peace that irritated him. Her calmness scraped against his nerves like sandpaper on glass. He began to avoid her, coming home late, sleeping on the couch, finding fault in everything she did, from how she arranged the plates to how she hummed while sweeping. He mocked her weight, called her lazy, complained that her presence made the house too quiet. But Clara never raised her voice. She simply kept showing up, pregnant belly and all, until her silence became louder than his insults. There came a night when the rain fell like a curtain over the town, hiding its sins and secrets. Jordan had come back drunk, muttering about wasted years, how Clara had trapped him, how she had killed his vibe. She didn't reply. She stood by the window, her arms folded over her belly, watching the rain like it held answers. The next morning, she was gone. The room was empty, the bed cold, and the kitchen quiet. On the center table sat a small onesie folded with care. No letter, no text, no dramatic goodbye. Just absence, heavy and deliberate. Jordan scoffed, thinking she'd be back. Weeks passed. She didn't return. Months rolled into a year, and life moved on without apology. Jordan remained in his flat, now too large for one man and too quiet for his ego. He tried calling old flames, but they had moved on. He lost his job when the firm downsized. He sold his car, then his wristwatch, then the last TV he owned. The mirror he once worshipped became a source of mockery, reflecting a man who had lost his shine. But pride is a stubborn stain. It stayed even when everything else had gone. He never spoke of Clara again, until one dry Thursday morning, while eating boiled yam in a kiosk near the motor park, he overheard two women talking about a madam who had returned to town with her teenage son and now owned half the retail shops in Rivershade. Clara Wills. That name dropped into his bowl like a scorpion. The yam suddenly tasted bitter, and when they mentioned her son's name, Eli, Jordan's spoon froze in midair. His chest throbbed like an old drum hit too hard. The past had returned, not crawling, but walking tall and wealthy. The sun that morning was merciless, casting shadows that clung to people like bad memories. Jordan sat beneath the rusted canopy of Mama Nkechi's buka, sweating over a bowl of yam porridge he hadn't paid for yet. The voices of those two women from earlier kept echoing in his mind like a bell that refused to stop ringing. Clara? Here? In Rivershade again? He sucked in a breath that didn't fill his lungs. He hadn't heard her name in years, not from lips, not from walls, not even from the wind. Life had buried it under the rubble of his routine misfortunes. But now, like a ghost stepping out of a forgotten closet, her name returned, dressed in wealth, walking in success. His heart thudded like a generator coughing to life, loud and uneven. He wiped his forehead with the hem of his shirt, the sweat now mixed with something colder, fear or regret, he couldn't tell. He stood abruptly, told Mama Nkechi he'd returned to settle the bill, and started walking through town with the urgency of a man chasing his own shadow. As he passed through the market, traders called out prices, beggars mumbled for coins, but it all faded into a blur. His eyes were busy scanning for the woman whose silence once screamed louder than his insults, whose belly once rose like the tide under his roof, whose presence he had once treated like a burden too heavy to carry. And now, here he was, stumbling through dust and daylight, looking for her like a thirsty man chasing a river he once poured into the sand. He found her the next day, not by intention, but by fate, if fate were a thread that wove its own needle. He had been walking aimlessly through the business district near Old Hill, where glass storefronts and painted signboards now lived in places that used to be dusty lots and wooden kiosks. And there, as if the years hadn't passed, stood Clara, taller than he remembered, firmer too, her chin slightly lifted like someone who had carried weight and refused to buckle. She was standing outside a store that bore her name in cursive gold, Clara's Haven. A young boy, maybe 13 or 14, stood beside her, laughing about something she said. Jordan froze. The boy had his ears, his nose. Even the way he lifted his shoulder when he laughed, it was all too familiar. He leaned against a pole, as if trying to become invisible, but the truth pressed against his chest like a hand. That was his son. The air around him thickened. His feet felt nailed to the pavement. He watched as Clara unlocked the shop door and walked in with the boy, who tossed a basketball into the corner before following her in. Jordan blinked rapidly, his vision blurring, not from sun or dust, but from the sudden, aching realization that this life had moved on without needing him. A whole story had been written, his blood inside it, and he hadn't been there for the first word. He didn't walk in that day. No. He stood outside for a long time, watching from behind the safety of reflection glass and flowering hibiscus plants. He saw Clara arrange throw pillows near the entrance, and struck staff with quiet authority, laugh softly when the boy teased her. It was a life carved from scratch, polished by persistence, and painted with dignity. He returned the next morning, not sure what he'd say. He hadn't planned apologies. How could you plan a sorry when your sins had taken root and grown limbs? Still, he entered. The bell chimed faintly, and Clara looked up. The silence between them cracked like dry harmattan lips. She didn't gasp. She didn't flinch. She simply stared. Then, gently, she told the boy to go check the stockroom. Once he was gone, she stepped forward, arms folded, eyes unreadable. Jordan cleared his throat. "You looked different," he said weakly. "You look the same," she replied, her voice as soft as it was sharp. He stood there, a man whose words used to flow like wine, now grasping for the right syllables. "I heard about you," he began, "and him. I wanted to say I'm sorry." "For everything." Clara didn't blink. "You're not here for me. You're here for him. Speak clearly." His mouth dried. He nodded. "I want to know him." Her face tightened just slightly. "You want to know the child you walked away from?" He said nothing. Regret weighed his shoulders like wet cloth. She sighed. "I forgave you long ago, Jordan." "But forgiveness isn't the same as reunion. If you want to see him, you'll need to answer questions you don't want to hear." 2 weeks passed before she allowed it. In that time, Jordan scrubbed through memories like old photographs, faded, bent at the edges, but still painfully sharp. He remembered the days Clara would hum while cooking, even after his harsh words. He remembered the night her silence drowned him more than any shouting ever could. Now, he sat in her living room, knee to knee with a boy who looked like him but didn't smile like him. Eli's eyes were steady, like twin torches shining into the dark corners of a father's empty legacy. Jordan started slow. "Your mother is strong. She raised you well." Eli tilted his head, unimpressed. "She didn't do it for you," he replied. The words struck Jordan like hailstones. He nodded, swallowing shame. "You're right. I wasn't there." Eli stood. Ele stood. "Solways Rashul be memon beten street. Sol is sol, sol ain't sol. Besign turn it old mending bun told." "I've read about you. You're in none of my baby pictures. You weren't there when I broke my arm in primary 4. Or when I cried because I didn't look like anyone in my mother's family." Jordan's throat tightened. "I was a fool." "Still are," Eli said, not cruelly, but honestly. Clara came in just then, holding a glass of juice. She didn't interrupt. Eli took the drink, turned to Jordan, and said, "You don't get to show up now and call yourself my father. A father is not just blood, it's presence." He walked out, leaving Jordan there, still as stone, cracked in more places than he could count. Jordan had once believed that time was a blanket, able to cover up any sin if one waited long enough beneath it. But now, as he sat on the edge of his small iron bed inside a one-room boys' quarters at the edge of Newmarket Road, time felt more like a mirror, one that refused to stop reflecting what he'd tried to forget. The meeting with Eli had peeled off layers he didn't know he still carried. The boy's words had been simple, but they sliced like razors, quiet, sharp, final. Since that day, Jordan found himself drifting through the town with no destination, no plan, only the aching thought that he had built his whole life around performance, but no one had clapped in the end. Clara's apartment, spacious, upstairs, and lined with bougainvillea flowers, stood in stark contrast to his rust-stained zinc roof and a mattress that squeaked at every toss. He had never once imagined this future. He had once been the flame, and women were moths. Now the flame was gone, and he had become a man sitting in darkness, surrounded by memories that laughed when he wept. Every noise outside his compound, the honk of a kiki, the bark of a dog, the chatter of children walking home from school, somehow reminded him of Eli's voice saying, "You weren't there." It echoed not just in his ears, but in his bones. There are regrets that gnaw slowly, like termites eating the legs of a chair. Jordan was learning now what it meant to sit and watch yourself collapse. He began watching from afar. Not stalking, not lurking, just observing, like a beggar at a bakery window. He discovered that Eli played football at a local youth club. The boy wore jersey number 5, played left wing, and had a fierce way of defending his goalpost, like a soldier who knew what it meant to lose ground. Jordan never approached. He stood by the chain-link fence with his hands in his pockets, his face shaded by a worn-out cap, and simply watched. Some evenings, Clara would show up too, her soft laughter carrying across the field as she handed Eli a bottle of malt or scolded him gently for limping too long before applying balm. Jordan would watch these exchanges with a chest so tight it felt like his ribs were choking his heart. He realized how many moments he had missed, school pickups, homework complaints, birthday cake mishaps, and the simple ritual of being the first voice a child hears in the morning. Those were treasures he'd sold for ego and carelessness, and now the market was closed. One day, while standing under a neem tree at the far end of the field, an elderly security man leaned beside him and said, "That boy fit play national one day. Nah, mama day always come. She no day miss him." Jordan nodded silently. "Na im papa and Ko?" the man asked. Jordan's lips parted, but the words refused to come out. He smiled faintly and walked away. That night he cried without shame, face buried in the curve of his elbow, like a man kneeling not just in pain, but in confession. He began to visit churches, not for salvation, not for miracle prayers, but for the silence. There was something about the hush between hymns, the soft creak of wooden pews, the flicker of tired fans turning slowly above bowed heads. He found comfort in the anonymity, in knowing he could sit among strangers and bleed internally without anyone noticing. He watched children recite memory verses, and he wondered what Eli's voice would sound like saying Psalm 23. On one such evening, while sitting in the third pew of a faded Catholic chapel behind the park, he saw Clara walk in with Eli. They were guests at a Thanksgiving service. Clara wore a cream lace gown, and her son walked beside her in a crisp white shirt and black trousers, taller now, almost a man. Jordan didn't speak. He watched from behind a wooden pillar as the priest praised Clara for her generosity and described Eli as a shining example of single-parent strength. That phrase stabbed Jordan's pride like a dagger made of truth. He clenched his fists, then relaxed them. He had no right to feel wounded. His hands were the ones that had dropped the child. Later that evening, he waited near the gate as they came out. He didn't approach. He simply bowed his head slightly when Clara's eyes met his. She didn't smile. She didn't scowl. She only nodded, barely, and walked past. But for Jordan, that nod was heavier than 1,000 sermons. It was the closest thing to mercy he had touched in years. Then came the day he couldn't ignore his reality any longer. His health took a turn, headaches that lingered like debt collectors, fatigue that clung to his body like a second skin. He was diagnosed with high blood pressure and something far worse, irreversible infertility caused by years of untreated infection and lifestyle neglect. The doctor said it calmly, like someone reading out a grocery list. Jordan nodded, thanked him, and walked out of the clinic like a man carrying invisible chains. That night, lying on his creaking mattress, he stared at the ceiling and whispered the truth he had never admitted aloud. I threw away my only son. It wasn't a metaphor. It wasn't exaggeration. It was a fact written in scars. He had a son once, a beautiful boy. And now that chapter had turned without him. He visited Clara's store again a week later, not to beg, not to explain, but to return something. He brought an old photo of her from when she was pregnant, something he had tucked into an old Bible and forgotten. He left it with the security guard and wrote no note. Just the photo. He didn't expect gratitude. He didn't want a second chance. He had finally accepted that some bridges don't burn. They dissolve quietly, until only memories float where the path once was. The town had changed its skin again, as it often did, like a snake shedding quietly with the seasons, except Jordan remained wrapped in the old one. Days blurred into weeks like spilled paint on a dusty canvas. His roasted corn stall at the edge of the bus terminal became his daily anchor, not out of passion, but necessity. He'd arrive at sunrise, arrange his corn on a wooden tray darkened by years of soot, and light his tiny charcoal stove with hands that trembled more now than before. The scent of smoke filled the air, clinging to his clothes, hair, and regrets. There was no glamour here, just survival, a thin string pulling him through each day. Sometimes passers-by would drop coins and not speak, and other times they would talk casually, as though his fall from grace was a tale they'd memorized. He didn't argue. He didn't defend. His voice, once honeyed with pride, now tasted of gravel. Still, it was during one of these sun-warmed afternoons that life cracked open a window. A sleek black car pulled up by the bus stop. The driver stepped out, and from the passenger seat emerged Eli, taller now, his body wrapped in the confidence of someone who knew where he belonged. He wore a branded school blazer and clean sneakers, talking into a phone like someone grown. Jordan turned his face instinctively, ashamed of the dust clinging to his skin, the blackened fingers holding a cob of corn. But Eli saw him. For a moment their eyes locked, not in recognition, but in something colder. Indifference. The boy turned, got into the car again, and was gone like a breeze that didn't stop to cool you. The encounter, brief as it was, planted a seed Jordan couldn't uproot. That night, as the wind howled through the cracks of his zinc shelter, and dogs barked in the distance like echoes of judgment, he sat outside and watched the stars. His thoughts, once sharp like broken glass, had become soft and haunting. He wondered if Eli knew that he, too, had once dreamt of being somebody. He had worn suits. He had been toasted at weddings, envied in gatherings, spoken of in the same breath as possibility. And now he sat barefoot with cracked heels and an old wrapper tied around his waist, listening to the hum of mosquitoes as if they were lullabies. Something in him longed to leave behind more than bitterness. Not a legacy, just a truth. The next morning, he scribbled a letter. Not a perfect one, just the kind that leaks from a heart too tired to hide anymore. It began with, "My son," and ended with, "Even if you never call me father, I'll still call you the best thing I never held long enough." He folded it into a brown envelope and carried it to Clara's store. He didn't ask to see her. He left it with the receptionist and walked away slowly, each step a page closing. He didn't know if Eli would read it. He didn't care for applause anymore. He just wanted to send something into the air that wasn't smoke or silence. He wanted to be heard once, even if only by the wind. A few days later, Clara found him again, not with malice, not with pity, but with something older than both, clarity. She met him by his stall, under the awning he had patched with cellophane and rope. She looked at him like a woman looking at a story she had already read but couldn't throw away. "I got your letter," she said. Jordan nodded, eyes to the ground. "I never wrote any when you carried him," he mumbled. "That one was just long overdue." She didn't reply immediately. Instead, she asked if he'd eaten. When he shook his head, she handed him a warm flask. Rice and peppered gizzard, his favorite back when the world still had room for laughter. They sat on a low bench beside the charcoal pot, and for the first time in years, words passed between them without venom. Clara spoke of her fears raising Eli alone, how there were nights the lights were out, the tears were loud, and the future looked like a wall with no ladder. Jordan listened with his hands clasped, not interrupting once. She told him about Eli's questions, why his nose looked different, why he never had a man teach him to shave, why his school forms only had one parent's signature. And then she said something he didn't expect. "I never hated you," she whispered. "I just didn't have the luxury to wait for you to become who you weren't ready to be." Her words weren't a dagger. They were a bomb, painful in their honesty but clean. He exhaled, feeling something lift, not forgiveness, not redemption, just weight. They didn't speak again for many weeks. Jordan continued roasting corn, occasionally seeing Eli on a billboard, in a school parade flyer, or through a car window. He stopped writing letters. He didn't wait by Clara's store. He returned to his quiet rhythm, not out of defeat, but acceptance. Then one rainy afternoon, while packing his items into a nylon sheet to shield them from the downpour, a boy in school uniform walked up to him. It was not Eli. It was one of his classmates. "Are you Mr. Jordan?" the boy asked. Jordan nodded, confused. The boy handed him a small envelope, rain dripping from the flap. Jordan opened it with trembling fingers. It wasn't from Eli. It was from Clara. 5 words, written in her neat cursive. "He's not ready, but I see you." Jordan stared at the paper until the ink smudged. That evening, he didn't eat. He just sat in the dim light of his room, the letter resting on his lap like a warm hand on a weary shoulder. That night, when he finally slept, he didn't dream of what was lost. He dreamt of corn roasting evenly, no flames too high, no smoke in his eyes, just balance. Maybe that was the closest he'd come to peace. And maybe, just maybe, it was enough. There is a silence that comes not from the absence of noise, but from the weight of knowing too much. Jordan now lived in that kind of silence, not bitter, not screaming, just present. He woke each day without expectation, swept the sandy space around his wooden stand with a straw broom that had more broken bristles than whole ones, and lit his charcoal stove with the discipline of a man who knew routine was the only thing left that wouldn't abandon him. The rainy season was now stretching its fingers across rivershade, and Jordan had learned to cover his corn sacks with black nylon before the clouds broke. That Wednesday, while his fire crackled and hissed under damp logs, a woman walked past with her daughter and stopped at his stand. The girl pointed at a cob, and the woman smiled at Jordan. "This corn smells like patience," she said. Jordan chuckled, handing it over with his now calloused hands. As the girl bit into it, her smile widened, and something about her reminded him of Eli's childhood he had never seen. He gave her an extra cob, refusing payment, and the mother thanked him, her voice soft like cloth dried under good sun. After they left, Jordan sat down slowly and looked at his own fingers. There was no ring, no watch, no gold. But there was warmth, small, flickering, fragile, but there. It was the kind of warmth a man doesn't chase, but which visits when he's no longer looking for applause. The next Saturday brought an unexpected ripple in Jordan's otherwise calm routine. He was setting up his stand just past 7 in the morning when a tall teenage boy in a gray hoodie approached, hands in his pockets, face half shadowed by the morning haze. Jordan looked up, heart thumping without rhythm, and knew even before the boy spoke. It was Eli. Taller now, the fullness of youth beginning to stretch into adulthood, with shoulders squared and a gaze that could hold thunder if needed. "Mum said I could come," he said. Jordan wiped his hands on a rag that smelled of smoke and hope. "You want corn?" he asked gently. Eli nodded. "So I'm just spray some that going poor bird buys will be nod. Wel nej, that foul will. That by deal will be veil will lease one v. The man bull a vine be let you pull of stivel shill." Jordan roasted the cow slowly, turning it like he was handling a newborn. They sat on an old bench while Eli ate. For the first few minutes, only the crunch of the corn and the chirping of far-off birds filled the air. Then Eli said, "She forgave you, you know. But that's her nature. I'm not like her." Jordan nodded without lifting his head. "You don't have to be," he whispered. Eli took another bite. "You ever think of what it would have been like if you stayed?" Jordan swallowed hard. "Every day," he replied. "But thoughts don't change diapers or walk crying babies in the night. I chose to leave, and I paid." Eli leaned back, chewing thoughtfully. "She said you wrote a letter. I read it. Twice." Jordan glanced at him, eyes misting. "Did it make you angry?" he asked. "No," Eli answered. "It made me understand what a broken man sounds like." That conversation didn't turn into laughter. It didn't end with hugs. But Eli returned the next weekend, and the weekend after that. Sometimes he came with school assignments, other times just to sit and eat corn. They never called each other father and son. They didn't need to. They were building a bridge, not from cement, but from presence. It was delicate, full of unspoken rules and careful pauses. Jordan never pried into Eli's life, never asked about his grades or friends. He simply listened, offered bits of wisdom that came from scars, not books. One day, Eli brought him a box of plasters and said, "For your hands. They look like they're always fighting fire." Jordan laughed, a deep, unforced laugh that felt like rain falling after a long drought. Clara stopped by once. She didn't stay long, just watched them from a distance, nodded with something close to contentment, and left. That evening, Jordan asked Eli, "What made you change your mind?" Eli shrugged. "I didn't change my mind. I just decided to see for myself if the man you are now is better than the one who left." The words settled between them like dust, unshaken, and Jordan, without defending or explaining, replied, "I'm still learning how to be someone worth staying for." That admission was the seed, and from it something tender began to grow. But not all growth is rewarded. The day Jordan truly understood that was the day Eli turned 18. Clara had planned a small party at their house, and Jordan was invited, not by obligation, but by choice. He arrived in his cleanest shirt, holding a leather-bound notebook he had bought as a gift. It was wrapped in old newspaper, but the thought behind it was earnest. The compound buzzed with music, laughter, the smell of jollof and chicken stew floating in the air like memory perfume. Jordan stood by the corner, greeting distant relatives who stared at him with raised brows and muted whispers. When Eli saw him, he smiled, but only slightly. And that smile, though small, was enough to settle Jordan's nerves. The moment of reckoning came when a family friend raised a toast. To Eli, the son of a queen, the man roared. Cheers followed. Then someone else said loudly, "And the father? Where's the man that raised him?" Clara stood. Her voice was clear, not proud, not ashamed. "Eli was raised with love. From me, from God, from time. No man raised him." The crowd went quiet. Jordan stood still, notebook in hand, face unreadable. Later that night, as guests trickled away, Eli walked up to him and said, "You were never there, and you'll never be erased. But you're not owed what you abandoned." Jordan nodded slowly. "I know." Eli took the notebook, held it for a second, then placed it on a table. He didn't open it. He didn't thank him. He walked away. And Jordan, standing alone in a room filled with clinking plates and soft music, realized that even forgiveness doesn't always come with welcome. The house was quiet again. That kind of quiet that doesn't just sit in the room but creeps into the skin and stays there, like cold harmattan dust that refuses to be shaken off. Jordan sat at the edge of his narrow wooden bed, the one that creaked even when he breathed, staring at the brown notebook he had meant for Eli. It sat unopened on the same wooden stool where he had placed it 2 days ago after returning from the birthday party. The newspaper wrap had softened around the corners, as if tired of waiting to be noticed. He didn't feel rage. No storm brewed inside him. Instead, he felt something heavier than anger, resignation. Like a man who finally understood that some doors don't open, not because they are locked, but because you were never meant to enter them again. Outside, the sky threatened to rain, but didn't. The clouds just hung there like unspoken words. Jordan stood, walked slowly to the stool, and unwrapped a notebook. Inside, he had written a letter, not one he ever intended to read aloud. It was a letter meant to linger in pages, not in mouths. "You don't have to read this," the first line said, "but if one day your heart grows curious, I want you to meet the man I once hoped to be." He closed the book and placed it on the stool again. No expectations, just a gesture. These days, he was learning how to live without applause. The week after the party passed like water running through tired fingers, visible, tangible, but gone before it could be held. Jordan returned to his corn stand, not because he needed the money, though he did, but because the fire soothed him. The dance of red coals under the wire mesh gave him something routine, something alive. It reminded him that some things, when turned slowly and watched carefully, don't burn. Children still stopped to watch the smoke rise, customers still haggled over change, and the weather still argued between sunshine and sudden rain. One afternoon, as he adjusted the charcoal tray, Clara appeared. She didn't smile, didn't scowl. She stood there with a calmness that felt practiced. "He read the letter," she said quietly. Jordan looked up, not startled, but curious. "Did he say anything?" She shook her head. "He folded it, kept it. That's all." Jordan nodded, unsure whether to feel relieved or exposed. Clara stepped closer, her hands folded across her stomach. "I don't think he'll ever call you Dad," she said. "And I don't think he needs to." Jordan nodded again. "I just want him to know I'm not trying to rewrite anything," he said. "I'm just trying not to disappear completely." Clara sighed, the kind of sigh that comes after a long climb. "I see you now. I think he does too. But don't wait for a moment that may never come. Let him grow into whatever answer he needs to give." She handed him a small bag. Inside was a clean shirt and a pair of black slippers. "For Sundays," she said. "You shouldn't keep showing up in dust." Then she turned and walked away, and Jordan stood still, holding more than fabric, holding something like closure, or maybe a new beginning wrapped in cotton. By the end of that month, Jordan began attending service again, quietly, from the back row. He didn't go for healing. He didn't go for blessing. He went because there was something honest about people singing songs they still struggled to believe. The fan above him turned in slow, coughing circles, and he always sat under it as if it could blow away the remnants of the man he used to be. One Sunday, Eli arrived late. He came alone, taller than most men now, shoulders strong, eyes sharp. He walked past Jordan's row, hesitated, then returned and sat beside him without a word. They sang the hymns, stood during prayers, bowed their heads during offerings, and when the service ended, they walked out together, not touching, not speaking, just breathing the same air. At the church gate, Eli paused. "Mom says you're selling less these days. Want me to build you a bigger stand?" Jordan shook his head. "No. Let it stay small. My pride already learned the lesson. The size doesn't matter anymore." Eli nodded, lips twitching in a ghost of a smile. "All right, but I'll bring you charcoal. Better ones. You're using the cheap kind." "Thank you," he said. And Eli replied, "Don't thank me yet. I haven't brought it." They parted ways there, no promises made, no titles exchanged. Just two people moving toward each other slowly, like rivers carving through stone. It wasn't a reunion. It was something smaller. But in that smallness, Jordan found a kind of grace, the kind that doesn't knock loud but enters anyway. When Clara came by a few days later, Jordan was already up, sweeping the path beside his stall before sunrise. She watched him from a distance before stepping closer. "He brought charcoal," she said. "Said you'd refuse money." Jordan smiled faintly. "He knows me too well." Clara nodded. "He doesn't talk about you much, you know." "He doesn't have to," Jordan replied. Presence can whisper. They stood in silence, listening to the town wake up, roosters crowing in the distance, a neighbor's child laughing over nothing, the low hum of a motorcycle engine sputtering to life. Then Clara turned, but before she left, she looked at him one last time. "I forgave you years ago, Jordan, but I haven't forgotten. Not because I'm bitter, but because remembering helps me stay strong." He didn't flinch. "I wouldn't want you to forget. It would make me believe it never happened." Clara nodded, satisfied with the honesty, and walked away. Jordan sat on his bench, the fire crackling gently. He turned one cob slowly, evenly, watching it roast to gold. Somewhere behind him, a boy's voice called out to his friend. Somewhere ahead of him, a new day stretched its arms, and as he bit into his own corn quietly, Jordan knew this was not redemption. It was not restoration. It was just life, messy, soft around the edges, but moving forward. And sometimes that was more than enough. Sometimes the people we treat as passing seasons end up carrying the very harvest we'll one day need. Jordan's story isn't just about failure or regret. It's about how pride, when left unchecked, can empty even the brightest rooms. We often think time will forgive what we refuse to face, but time only stretches the silence. And silence doesn't always heal. Sometimes it hardens. To every man or woman listening, don't wait for everything to fall apart before you realize what matters. Don't assume love will wait for you to grow up. If someone chooses to carry your absence quietly, don't mistake that for weakness. One day they may rise without you, and not out of spite, but survival. If you've hurt someone, apologize while the road is still walkable. If you've been hurt, heal with your head up. Forgiveness is not weakness, and forgetting isn't a requirement for peace. Some memories stay, not to haunt, but to guide. Whatever season you find yourself in, whether you're roasting corn or riding high, never lose your humanity. Life has a way of humbling the proud and lifting the quiet. May this story teach you not to throw away what you cannot afford to lose. Dear Lord, we come with hearts that have known both noise and silence, both laughter and loss. We lift up every listener who has carried regret like a heavy bag, and every soul who's waited for love that never turned back. Father, we ask for the strength to let go of pride before it robs us of the people who matter. Soften the hearts of those who walk in ego, and heal the hearts of those who walk in pain. For every man who walked away too soon, give him the courage to return, not to be praised, but to be real. For every woman who carried the weight alone, wrap her in a peace that money cannot buy. For the children who grew up without answers, let your grace fill the pages their parents left blank. Lord, teach us that presence is a gift, not a burden. Let us value time, not waste it. Give us the wisdom to speak when it counts, and the humility to listen when it hurts. Let bridges be built, not of apology alone, but of consistent love. And for those still waiting at the gates of forgiveness, let them not wait in vain. We declare healing where there's been silence. We declare growth where there's been loss. And we declare peace in the places we least expect it. In the mighty name of Jesus we pray. Amen. Hope you enjoyed this interesting story. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel. See you again in my next story.